Hello, and welcome to the Tower Coffee Hour and a great event. We got a chance to go downtown to St. David's Episcopal Church in downtown Austin and listen to Jeff Speck talk about walkable cities and what could be done to make Austin a better city for all of us. He had some great ideas, had some great examples of other cities, some good research, and let's go listen to him. Don't need to hear me talk.
So these are just some of our supporters, and again, not just the donors we saw on the screen a second ago made this possible, but we have supporters who support our work all year round. This event was a big lift for a nonprofit like ours, and we made it happen, and we're really proud of it. And these people were some of the people who made it happen. But I said to myself tonight, I really want at least a whole bunch of new members. So please lift up your phone and scan that QR code. Maybe you can make the decision later, but we would love to have more people supporting our work because we are pushing for bike lanes on 6th Street. We're pushing for the big loop. We're pushing for lane conversions. We're pushing for a citywide bike network. We're pushing for so many things, and there is so much potential in this city. And we have already come so far, and there is so much further left to go. So please become a Safe Streets Austin member. All you do is you donate monthly or annually at any amount, and that's it, and you're on board. So please support the organization. So we're going to have Jeff's talk. We're going to have the Q&A. At the end, we're going to have a group photo where everyone's going to come up, and we're going to have a photo for those who support. So I will introduce Jeff Speck, and then I will get out of the way and let the man talk for himself. So Jeff Speck. So if book sales and video views are any indication, Jeff Speck is one of the most listened to urbanists in the entire world. Suburban Nation, which he wrote with Andres Duani and Elizabeth Plater Zyberg, was the best-selling planning title of the 2000s. The Wall Street Journal called it the Urbanist Bible. His award-winning book, Walkable City, published in 2012, is the best-selling city planning title of this century and was named the second best urban planning book of all time. And it's been translated into 8 languages. Very impressive. His 2018 book, Walkable City Rules, 101 Steps to Making Better Places, has already been translated into 6 languages. His TED Talk and YouTube videos have been viewed more than 6 million times. I think the best video I ever did was 18,000. And in a recent Planetizen poll, he was voted one of the 10 most influential urbanists also of all time. Formerly Director of Design at the National Endowments for the Arts, Jeff is a partner at Speck Dempsey, an urban planning firm based in Boston. Jeff and Speck Dempsey's full list of clients is too long to read here, but includes the cities of Boston, Chattanooga, Carmel, Des Moines, Laredo, Louisville, Memphis, Mesa, Oklahoma City, Tulsa, and many, many more. Last year, Jeff celebrated the 10th anniversary of Walkable City with a new edition containing 8 new chapters. And again, he'll be signing that at the back of the hall after this evening's talk. So that's all from me. Put your hands together for the one and only Jeff Speck.
Wow. Adam, that was the best introduction I've ever gotten anywhere. You know, I like to normally roam and stand up and move around, but because of the way we're spread out, I think it makes sense for me to actually use the podium, which is a little weird for me. I'll try to remain casual behind the podium. If you want to ask a question, just because there's so many of you and we want to have a properly organized session, you need to scan that, right? Because the questions will come from people who are typing them into their phones. So this is your last chance. If you don't scan it, you can't speak after this event. So thank you, Adam. This is probably my 7th or 8th time in Austin over the last 30 years. It was great to see some old friends. It's wonderful to be welcomed back. I know this is probably the best audience I'm ever going to have, so I'm looking forward to this talk. this talk was named by Adam Towards a More Walkable Austin. But I gave a talk in 2014 called Towards a More Walkable Austin. Who came to that talk? Very few of you, which is good. So it won't be boring and repetitive for most of you. And for those of you who came before, I've heard this talk hundreds of times, and it's still very good. So I've changed the name just to be different. We're calling this Going Both Ways in Austin. Because I was asked, and this is really fun for me, I was asked to talk just about I'm going to talk about a few other things that some of you have heard before, but I was asked to address this issue of one-way versus two-way streets. And so I actually have hours to say about that one topic, but I managed to narrow it down and look a little more closely at Austin as it relates to that topic. So that's what we're talking about. Our firm is called Speck Dempsey. With me is Gus Demerath. Could you stand up and wave? He's an associate planner. When I'm being thronged by admirers after the talk and you want to talk to me, you can talk to Gus instead. So yeah, the books, I've built this readership around the idea of walkability. And it's important for me to tell audiences that it's not about walkability for me, it's about good planning. But I found the best way to communicate planning and the best way to do good planning is to think of it through that lens of walkability. Certainly in terms of communicating with audiences and getting them to embrace new urbanism, which is another word for it, or best practices in urban planning, which is a boring term for it, and we used to call it traditional town planning. But getting audiences to embrace this concept, what I found was that if you frame it through the window of the walkable city, it's easier to grasp. But then there was kind of a doubling back of a realization that, well, if I mean it, if that's what I'm calling it, then let's think about that and think about what it really means to make a walkable place. And it turns out that if you make your decisions as a city planner around that sole kind of North Star of walkability, you make better decisions. So it's kind of come back to reinfect my practice. This is the 10th edition version that is discernible by the bike lane running down the right side of the cover. And in it, I talk about the general theory of walkability and the question, how do you get people to walk in our driving culture where most people own cars and it's in the driveway between them and everything, and it's so easy to fall into. And of course, it's heavily subsidized, you're driving. So in those circumstances, how do you get people to choose to walk? And the answer is that the walk needs to be better than the drive, or as good as the drive, which means it needs to be simultaneously useful, safe, comfortable, and interesting. And those of you who have read my book, who's read my book? Oh, wow, that's great. You know that that's the way that we organize our thinking around being more walkable. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the other three categories, but mostly today we're going to focus on safety. It turns out, though, since the goal is a vital downtown Austin, that we're going to talk about vitality and livability as well. But the principal conversation then will be around, having a successful downtown, but mostly having a safe downtown. We are experiencing a pedestrian death epidemic from traffic violence in the US. You are 78% more likely to be killed by a car than you were 15 years ago. And there's a lot that's been investigated around that. This wonderful book, has anyone read Right of Way by Andy Schmidt? A number of you. This book laid out the problem, talked about the causes, and there's a few that we could talk about. The data are really bad. This is Norm Garrick, who has the pleasure of teaching urbanism in the US and in Switzerland. And this is a former Congress for New Urbanism where he gave the statistic, in 1975, you were 2 times more likely to be killed in a traffic crash as a pedestrian in the US than in the Netherlands, and now it's 20 times higher. And we're going to talk about the difference between American traffic planning and Vision Zero European traffic planning in a minute. Probably the biggest factor in this epidemic is the size of our cars, and the fact that you're pretty much twice as likely to be killed if you're hit by an SUV or light truck than by a car. You end up under the vehicle instead of on the hood. It takes much longer to stop, et cetera. There are other factors. This is probably the largest one. Clearly, we'd love to do something about that, but that's a long-term solution that certainly the political winds may not be in its favor to see any sort of government regulation that would cause our vehicles to get smaller, certainly not in Texas, right? So the question is, what can we change more quickly? And of course, the answer is our streets, to create streets where people are driving more slowly. This is a diagram you've probably seen before. It is as true as ever, but it's a little bit misleading as it understates the risk that faster vehicles pose to pedestrians. Because yes, you're 5 times as likely to be killed when hit by a car going 30 miles an hour than when hit by a car going 20 miles an hour. But of course, it takes much longer to stop when you're driving a higher speed, and your cone of vision narrows when you're driving a higher speed. So there's more likelihood that you'll be hit as well. So every mile per hour matters. This is Dong Ho Chang, who is the Public Works Director for Seattle. He determined through some analysis that every mile per hour reduction in driver speed results in a reduction in fatal crashes of between 7 and 22%. So our goal as people who are trying to make our city safer for everyone, but particularly for pedestrians and cyclists, is just to post the right speeds, which most cities do, but then to get folks to drive the posted speeds, which is much, much harder. And I don't tell cities, we want to slow the traffic down. Don't use that term, because people are like, oh, congestion, right? Oh, you're going to make it harder for me to get to work. We say, we just want people to drive the speed limit. And we have this condition in the US that if you're not in the business may seem really weird. You have to be an engineer to understand how this even happened. But we have been instructed for decades to design streets for speeds well above the posted speed limit. So I've worked in communities that we've designed where we wanted to post a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, and they made us design the streets for 30 miles an hour because of this idea of forgiveness, which is the exact opposite of the Vision Zero approach that is so successful in Europe. The reason for this is that traffic engineering in the US, or street engineering, grew out of highway engineering. And in highway engineering, forgiveness saves lives. Because think about how you set your speed when you're on a highway. If you're me, you look for the speed limit sign, and then you set your cruise control for 9 miles an hour over the speed limit sign. Right? But whether it's 9 or 5, or you're even got your foot on the gas, the speed that you're driving is a function of the posted speed limit. And for that reason, anything you could do to add forgiveness to the system is going to make it a safer system. So what's a more forgiving system? Wider lanes, more lanes to spread out in, shoulders, clear zones, no trees, no intersections, no opposing traffic, right? All these things that increase elbow room and increase forgiveness make it safer because your speed is a constant. But now think about how you drive when you're in a city or a town or anywhere where there's people around and buildings and stuff. Your speed, you're probably not even looking at the speed limit signs. You're looking at the environment around you. And it's the environment that's determining your speed. Therefore, all the things that make a street safer, forgiving, with more elbow room are actually just causing you to speed up, which is making you, exponentially more dangerous to other drivers and to pedestrians. So of course we have to enforce the speed limit with radar when it's a 70-mile-an-hour street that's marked at 25 miles an hour. So we design streets like this, and then we give people flags. This is my wife and one of my sons crossing a street in Salt Lake City, which is better than nothing. There's a much better program now that I discovered from Vancouver. Maybe you've seen it in Granville Island. It's called the Grab a Brick program, where they give you these bricks to hold while you cross the street. Let people see them. Be sure to maintain eye contact. The funny thing is, these are Canadians, so they're nice people. So these are foam bricks. They're not real bricks. Anyway, Austin is to be congratulated for having embraced Vision Zero, which is a whole bunch of different steps, policy and otherwise. But the key thing that distinguishes Vision Zero, and while I'm speaking, I'll just flip through all of the things that has accomplished, that your city has accomplished by embracing Vision Zero. But the key thing that distinguishes Vision Zero from previous approaches to traffic engineering is that the streets are designed to make it feel uncomfortable to go faster than the posted limit. And so that means that we apply a whole bunch of different things to cause people to not want to drive faster than the speed limit. And there's about 14 of them. And in Walkable City Rules, to a degree in Walkable City, but even more so in Walkable City Rules, which is my more technical book, and I'll talk more about the books at the end, there's about 14 things you can do. For example, removing a center line from a street makes people go 7 miles an hour slower. Well, how about that? Right? There's a lot of them. I'm only going to talk about a few of them tonight because they're the ones that pertain most obviously here in Austin. But what are they? So the first is the number of lanes. Clearly, the more lanes you have, the more it looks like a highway, the faster people go, the longer it takes to cross. You don't want to, we always tell cities, we don't want to, because we can't, we don't want to choke your traffic by removing lanes that are needed, but we can remove the extra lanes. And most cities have extra lanes, and you have extra lanes. One city that had a ton of extra lanes was Oklahoma City, which in their best walking cities issue, Prevention Magazine named Oklahoma City the worst city for pedestrians in the entire country. And that was, I think, 2008. And the mayor, who I had met at the Mayor's Institute, which, by the way, is now and then run by UT. And a couple of the times I came to Austin, it was to preside over a Mayor's Institute at UT, wonderful program. I had met the mayor of Oklahoma, and he said, what do we do? How do we fix this problem? And I said, let's do a walkability study. And he said, what's that? And I said, I don't know, but we'll figure it out together. And I went to Oklahoma City with more hair than I currently possess. And this was 2008, 2009. And we looked at the car counts in the downtown. And we know, any engineer will tell you that 2 lanes of traffic with no turn lanes, just 2 lanes of traffic on a 2-way street can handle 10,000 cars per day. And by the way, we ended up making a rule that if a street had more than 2 lanes, it could not have, if a street had fewer than 10,001 cars a day, it could not have a center turn lane. It could only be 2 lanes. But anyway, we know that. So we looked at these car counts in the downtown core, 9,000, 6,000, 5,000, 3,000, and notice they were all 4 to 6 lane streets. And they were in the city plan to stay as 4 to 6 lane streets with these numbers, 10,000, 8,000. So there was this big mismatch between the number of lanes and the number of people who wanted to be in those lanes. And the extra lanes weren't accomplishing anything, right? Because there was very little congestion. Coincidentally, with the release of that plan, Devon Energy decided to build a 51-story tower in the downtown, which was going to generate $200 million in tax increment. And they asked, how can we spend that money? Basically on the same day I handed my plan in. And happily, they agreed, they decided to rebuild, to reconstruct from building face to building face, 40 blocks of the downtown. I was in the right place at the right time. It was my job to design the curb to curb of these streets. I was able to eliminate 1/3 of the driving lanes. I was able to double the amount of on-street parking, which the merchants loved, and add a bike network, albeit a 2009 quality bike network, where there had been no bike network before. And so the first thing we do when we look at a city is to count the cars. Now, I was informed today that these are COVID car counts in your downtown. It's hard to see in this projection, but there are blue ones that are post-COVID. But the red ones are COVID and probably need to be doubled, at least to be accurate. But even if you double, or in some cases triple some of these numbers, you've got a ton of streets, the majority of streets, that are handling 10,000 cars per day or less. So can every street become a 2-way street? No. But many of the streets can become 2-lane streets. So that's great to know. So that's the first step. Sorry, zooming in a little bit. You can see the blue numbers, 7,000, 10,000, 6,000, 5,000, right? So these are all streets like the Oklahoma streets that do not need to be, in terms of not having congestion, do not need to be more than 2 lanes. You also look at the current traffic flow here in the ACT plan, and you can see a lot of green, right? Bright green, less bright green. You've got a level of service. Most of your intersections are level of service of A, B, or C. Level of service is misleading because people think of it as a report card, but actually, I say LOS doesn't stand for level of service. It stands for lack of success. If you have a downtown that's an A or a B, it tends to not be a healthy downtown because people are driving too fast. Most downtowns want to be a D or an E, and even the traffic engineers will tell you this, that a D or an E is acceptable, but also better for business. So there's opportunity there, but also notice that there's choke points. And those choke points occur at key knuckles because traffic is concentrated on certain streets. And this concentration of traffic rather than dispersion of traffic is what causes the problems. A proper grid where every street is pretty small allows a much healthier condition where you don't get these choke points where traffic is piling up in smaller intersections. You also have a very lucky condition. You've probably been to many cities where the off-ramps off the highway go into the city. So you have an off-ramp that comes down and becomes, 6th Street, or an on-ramp that comes down, 5th Street and goes onto the highway. And that's something you find in a lot of American cities, and it makes it harder to revert those streets to two-way travel because you have all these cars pouring on or pouring off. You don't have that. You have this frontage, this famous Texas, everyone has them in Houston and Dallas. You have these frontage roads. And not only do you have this frontage road that has porous connections, block after block after block, but you're about to make a surface highway next to your highway when you expand I-35. If you've read Megan Kimball's book, you know that fiasco. But the fact is that you're going to have this massive surface highway next to the buried, I guess, highway. Is that the idea? So all of these intersections are connecting into the grid, and so dispersing the traffic actually is going to work quite well with those intersections. So anyway, getting back to Oklahoma City, just a few pictures. This is a typical street before, 3 lanes. Here it is reduced to 2 lanes. This street was 3-lane one-way. By the way, half the streets were one-way. None of the streets are one-way now. This was a 3-lane one-way. Now it's 2 lanes. This was a 4-lane one-way. Now it's 2 lanes with a tram in it. This street I showed you before became this street. And the biggest east-west street in the downtown, Sheridan, became this street. You see we used to stripe door zone bike lanes. We try not to do that anymore, but 2009. So I always tell cities, this is what you do if you have money, right? If you have money and you want to spend it, you can rebuild. But most cities, I say, don't rebuild, restripe. You can restripe a whole downtown for the cost of rebuilding just a few streets. And when you move the curbs, you get into drainage issues and construction costs. And most cities that we work with, like currently Louisville, are planning just to restripe the streets and not rebuild. Keep the curbs where they are. This is Cedar Rapids, who hired us not long after Oklahoma City. Their budget was 0. They said, we are going to be repaving our downtown streets over the next decade, and we just want to repave them to a better standard. And they had a very nice downtown grid with small blocks like you, but the streets were big. You can see the number of lanes in these streets, a number of 4-lane one-ways that you see. So we were able to change this, again, and the traffic counts didn't justify it. So we were able to change this to this, okay? From this to this, which allowed us to turn the parking, which was red as head in. We were able to change the parking from this to this. And we were able to change the bike lanes from this to this. So they did it all just with a new top coat and paint. So a typical street, over 8 years, a typical street went from that to that. What you see here is someone learning how to use a bike lane. But this is day 1. This is the day they opened it, so they're doing better now. So one-way streets the evidence keeps piling up that one-way streets are less safe. The feeling of all the cars moving in the same direction, the lack of opposing travel, the opportunity to jockey from lane to lane. This is one of your one-ways. Crossing the streets feels very different than crossing a 2-way street. In Walkable City Rules, I have 4 separate 2-page chapters on the benefits of 2-way travel. One of them is called Revert Multi-Lane One-Ways to 2-Way for Business, and we're going to talk about business. And this article that came out regarding Vancouver, Washington, where this gentleman's from, called The Return of the 2-Way Street, which caught my eye also in 2009. He told the story of Vancouver, Washington, which had tried all the tricks of the 80s to bring back this street, which was a 2-lane one-way that was dead, bring it back to life. They tried the bricks, the berms, the banners, the bandstands, the bollards, and the balloons, and nothing worked until they convinced the state DOT, who owned this street, to make it two-way. And according to this article, the number of trips on the street stayed the same, but now it was in two directions, and the number of visits to the stores doubled because of people moving more slowly and because of better visibility, which we'll talk about in a minute. East Broad Street in Savannah, an unpublished study that was handed to me by the person who did it, looked at the tax rolls surrounding East Broad Street, which was converted one way in 1969. And when that happened, 64% of the businesses left the tax rolls. They disappeared. It was reverted back to two-way in 1990, and very quickly, 50% new businesses arrived. One of the principal issues is this idea of eclipsed frontage. And if you think about it, this car, any car traveling on this one-way street will never see these facades. And of course, a lot of shoppers are drivers, and so you have a lot of eclipsed frontages. By the way, these are also zones for crime, because you can do a drug deal or whatever, and you won't be seen by drivers. Something to remember, drug dealers. Then, this is New Haven, which has a bunch of one-way streets downtown. I could not convince the mayor of New Haven to change this. But everywhere you see the gray are obscured frontages that aren't being viewed in this one-way system. So that's one issue. Then there's what we call the feast or famine scenario, which is that the path to work is very different from the path home from work. Certain stores serve breakfast. Certain stores serve drinks and dinner. This is Cayocho in Miami, the Tamiami Trail, which is everybody's ride to work. Well, guess what? It's full of restaurants and other bars and other businesses that barely make it because no one's driving by when they are likely to be having dinner or a drink. So that's an issue as well. So some success stories. I didn't work on Vancouver, Washington. This is New Albany, Indiana. New Albany, Indiana is a wonderful historic downtown. It's across the river from Louisville. This was our plan. They did all of it, except for these two segments right here. But this was an entirely two-way, sorry, it was an entirely one-way downtown. And and our plan reverted the whole thing to two-way because we were convinced that was the right solution. They were very worried about it. They sat on it for 3 years and didn't do anything. The fire chief was worried about access and having that extra lane to park the truck. So was the police chief. They did cut out most of our bike lanes, I have to say, and as you'll see, made some of them worse. But finally, after 3 years, they did the whole thing in one summer. So a typical street went from this to that. You know, this bike lane in our plan was a buffered bike lane, but this is as far as they were willing to go. But you can see the two-lane one-way becoming basically a two-way. And the mayor hosted us when the CNU, the Congress for New Urbanism, was in Louisville. And after delaying the project for 3 years, he said, the two-way streets reversion has turned out even better than expected. Traffic is slowed, pedestrians feel more confident and comfortable walking downtown, business is up, and more families are moving to New Albany. That was the mayor's statement. We're going to talk about the safety aspect in a minute. You have your own great success and successes around reverting one-ways to two-way. You have the Downtown Streets, Great Streets Master Plan. You have the Great Streets Master Planner in the room. You're probably aware, well, you may not be aware, that the Congress for New Urbanism has a very special award for the people who inspired the leaders of the Congress. And Sinclair Black has won that Athena Award, along with very few other people. You should be pleased he is here in Austin. And this great street that was in the Great Streets Plan pretty much is how 2nd Street turned out, right? With the wider sidewalks and double trees on one side. The economic impacts have been spectacular. This study charted the difference between 2000 and 2018. All of these properties were rebuilt in one way or another. And city tax revenues generated by the area were 10 times higher in 2018 than 2000. And of course, It wasn't just a restriping, it was a reconstruction, which mattered. It does matter. And other things were done as well. But I think most people here understand that the reversion to two-way travel was, we say the restoration of two-way travel was a key factor in that outcome. And then, as important as financial returns are, the Austin community also realized a variety of public benefits and amenities, more housing, more parks, more trails. So a lot of other good things happened, and the before and after is astounding. We did a big walk around downtown last night, or yesterday afternoon, and we didn't see many pedestrians, we didn't see many cyclists. And then we got to 2nd Street, and we were, we could barely make it through the crowds on the sidewalk. I'm exaggerating, but it was really a different experience. This impact on development, on business, on real estate, and on economic vitality is well understood by people for whom that is their business. So the Downtown Commission, I'm not sure if you're aware of this recommendation, the Downtown Commission gave to council. I was heartened by the final line. Now, therefore, the City of Austin Downtown Commission recommends that the City Council direct the city manager to revise the Austin Core Transportation Plan, the ACT plan, to convert all one-way streets downtown into two-way streets, including 6th Street. And if your only goal is business vitality, that's certainly the proper choice. There are other goals as well, which I think will also point us in that direction, but we can talk about that. Rule 39 in Walkable City Rules is to revert multi-lane one-ways to two-way for safety. And this is where we're probably going to spend the most time tonight, is talking about the safety differences. In the book, I say, why do people speed on multi-lane one-ways? First, due to that lowered risk of head-on collisions. Second, because a street with many lanes in the same direction just feels like a highway. Third, because a choice of lanes provides the opportunity to jockey. When you have one lane, I don't care if it's a one-way street or a two-way street, when you have one lane in a given direction, then the slowest driver sets the speed. But when you have multiple lanes, not only can you speed past another driver, but you become a different kind of driver. I know that from my experience driving on Cayocho that I showed you. Every day, I knew when to be on the left and when to be on the right. And driving on it was no longer about getting where I was going. It was about getting where I was going as fast as possible, because that was something I could accomplish, right? I think, I don't know, is it a man thing? I don't know if everyone feels this way. But the fact that there was a way to do it better, which is defined by faster, made me a jockey on that street. And I think most people, men and women, feel that way. So here are some studies. This one, it's not by the University of Chicago is talking about it, but it's actually by the University of Louisville. And they looked at Louisville. They looked at Brooks, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Street. Brooks and 1st were reverted to two-way travel before we got involved in Louisville. 2nd and 3rd weren't. Now, Louisville, if you know American cities, set the record in 1959 with the first and most extreme one-way conversion of their street network. Every single street except Broadway was made one-way. Eventually, they plowed a highway through it as well, but for good measure. But it was a complete change. And then Brook and 1st and 2nd, the area I'm showing you is down here. It's not even in the downtown, where we've now completed a plan that was just adopted that they're supposed to implement over the next 5 years to convert almost every downtown street back to two-way travel. So Brook and 1st were reverted to two-way, 2nd and 3rd were kept as one-way. On the two-ways, car crashes went down 48%, and even crime went down 23%. On the one-ways, crashes went up and crime went up. So that's Louisville. That's example number one. Not too far from Louisville is Israel. This plan was done in a long time ago, 1983 through 1985, safety of one-way urban streets. They compared streets similar width, similar number of lanes, similar amount of traffic, similar amount of pedestrians. And they found over 1,142 injury accidents, that's a lot, over 3 years. Accident rates were clearly higher on one-way streets for all street classes and accident types, both for mid-block sections and for intersections. Next study, are child pedestrians at increased risk of injury on one-way compared to two-way streets? The results, the injury rate was 2.5 times higher on one-way streets than on two-way streets. And this is a kicker, 3 times higher for children from the poorest neighborhoods than those from wealthier neighborhoods. So the impact is also one of equity, but clearly more evidence. So I just ask, are there conflicting studies? There are studies that say, well, it may not be causal, it may just be a correlation, but I don't really care. Because if our lesson from changing one-ways to two-way is that crashes go down, crime goes down, people are safer, I don't need to know the mechanism at work. I don't look so much at the theory behind it as just the outcomes. So if this technique, which has resulted in safer streets in other cities in longitudinal studies, is applied here, one would think, one can hope it would have the same result. If there are conflicting studies, I haven't seen them. I don't think anyone has concluded any more that one-way streets are safer. We conclude at the very least that they're no better or no worse. But I believe the data shows very much, as I just showed you, that they are worse. Finally, reverting multi-lane one-ways to two-ways for convenience is something we like to talk about. This is Tulsa, where we did another walkability study. This is the hotel lobby of the Hyatt in Tulsa. This is the exit of the parking deck in Tulsa. And if you want a valet to bring your car, you should plan for an extra 10 minutes because there are 5 turns and 4 signals for the loop so inconvenient things like this happen in cities. Here's a note. We were working in Des Moines. We've also reverted a couple streets. This was from a city councilor talking about its inconvenience, but it's also fear. As we were talking, as my constituents and I were talking, the residents in attendance said that if the streets were two-way streets, they would go downtown. When I asked them about this, they all said they were afraid of the one-way streets, so they stay away from downtown. They're afraid of being lost. They're afraid of, it's not even a fear so much as no one likes to be disoriented, right? And so not only does that matter in terms of one-way versus two-way, but something that happens here more than in other cities is like two-way, one-way, two-way, 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 one-way, right? The interruptions of the two-way system with the one-way pieces is very confusing to people. Then also in terms of convenience, yes, green waves are more possible on one-way street. You know what I mean by green waves, right? The catching the greens as you go are much more possible on one-way streets than two-way streets. But actually, if you have a dominant path of travel into town in the morning and out of town in the evening, you can also time two-way signals. The other point I want to make about the green wave is that you'll hear, oh, well, we've timed the green wave to 15 miles an hour so people can't speed. In fact, that's only true if you're at the front of the green wave, because you can get on the street near the end of the green wave and speed to get to the front. Also, when you get onto a one-way street, let's say this is the one-way street and I'm coming from a side street, you don't want to get hit, right? So you drive on like this. And there might be a pedestrian. There's lots of crashes where the pedestrian's in the crosswalk, where Gus is the pedestrian, and I'm looking this way and running into them. So another factor. So now we're getting back to New Albany, Indiana, where the police chief said, in his 28 years as a police officer, he has never seen a better scenario for public safety. Speeds have been reduced, crashes are down, and importantly, response times to calls for service are far better than they've ever been. So yes, they've lost that extra lane to double park, but they have sirens and stuff. They can park wherever they want, and they don't have to loop around. They can go more directly where they're going. This is Tulsa, where I was trying to convince them that they had more lanes than they needed at rush hour. This was rush hour in Tulsa. This is one of the streets we managed to revert in Tulsa. You can see from one-way to two-way. I showed this already. This is a list that's 8 years old of about 70 cities, including Austin, that have had success in reverting their one-way streets to two-way streets. When you're a planner, you hate to be accused of having a rubber stamp. You want cities to think that every solution that you bring to them is unique to them and special for them, and that you've really looked at their situation and understand it deeply, which we try to do. The problem is that the one-way streets, and we're going to talk about signals versus stop signs in a minute, we have a rubber stamp at Speck Dempsey, which is reverting one-way systems back to two-way and turning signals into stop signs. And the reason we do that is because there used to be a rubber stamp. From 1959 through 1980, where city after city, hundreds of American cities, coast to coast, changed their two-way networks to one-way networks, either a couple pairs or the whole downtown, like I showed you in Louisville. There was no public process. Those were the days when citizens were not involved. Most cities I work in, there'll be some old timer who shows up who says, yeah, I remember when all the shops died because the two-way streets became one-way. And other factors, yes. But there's, I don't know if people hide their failures, but we try to run an evidence-based business, and we try to understand, where we might be wrong about things. If any of you knows one story of one street being reverted to two-way travel that turned out badly, I'd like to hear it, because I haven't heard it yet in this work that we do. So another good story is Over the Rhine in Cincinnati. Who's been to Over the Rhine in Cincinnati? Do you know this? This is a great street that was dead, and converting it to two-way travel brought this street back. It's just a great spot. It's the best spot to hang out in Cincinnati now. And I want to talk a little bit about philosophy. Among the critics are traffic engineers and academics who were taught some fixed principles. Joseph Dumas, the University of Tennessee, argued a few years ago, the primary purpose of roads is to move traffic efficiently and safely, not to encourage or discourage business or rebuild parts of town. Streets are tools for traffic engineering. This is the cart driving the horse, right? We shouldn't confuse ends with means. The end is to have a vital, successful, productive, socially wonderful downtown. One way to achieve that is to make it easy to get in and out of it. The goal is not to make it easy to get in and out of downtown. If it's not vital and successful and productive and socially wonderful, then what's the point? So we need to remember that. And I prefer, and I'm going to talk more about other ways of thinking about it, but the problem that you often run across when you want to make these changes is the cost. Because if you think about it, when you're adding two-way travel to a street that's crossed by other streets, you need to add signal heads. That when the typical one-way crosses a one-way and becomes a two-way crossing a two-way, you need to add two signal heads or two signal arms. Those are very expensive, particularly now with the hurricane rules and other things. It's a great expense. And so fortunately, there's another factor that can make it much less expensive, and that is avoiding signals entirely. This is not a roundabout signal, this is a piece of art. But it reminds us that we are vastly over-signalized in the US. When I was working in Davenport, Iowa, the town planner was wondering why this little downtown that had very little traffic had so many signals, and he looked into it. The same consulting firm that was telling them where they needed to have signals was selling them their signals. And I think that probably happened in a lot of places. So this is the wonderful study that happened because of the strong arm of the state in Pennsylvania. And the state DOT in Pennsylvania, until the current Secretary of Transportation, who's wonderful for a Secretary of Transportation, took over, the state has a lot of control over streets in Pennsylvania. So they came out with this rule that said that actually, if your street doesn't have enough traffic on it, then it can't have a signal on it. And the city of Philadelphia had to remove 472 signals, and they replaced them with always stop signs. And they collected a bunch of data, and they found that crashes went down by 24%, severe injury crashes by 63%, severe pedestrian injury crashes by 68%. They believe the safety benefit stems from the elimination of the local habit of speeding up to beat the red, which they only do in Philadelphia. But I think the statement is wrong in two ways. First, it's not a local habit. Second, the problem isn't just speeding up to beat the red, which is a problem. If you think about it, any signalized intersection, half the people on that street have carte blanche to go 20, 30 miles an hour through that intersection, and that's what they do. In an always stop sign, only the most flagrant scofflaw is going to go through it at more than 5 miles an hour. People say, oh, no one really stops. I don't care. People coast very slowly and carefully. They don't want to get hit. They coast slowly and carefully through the intersection. And so it becomes a low speed intersection as opposed to a high speed intersection. Pedestrians rule. There's a lot of eye contact, right? People are confused. Is it my turn to go? That's great. That's what you want. I'm not joking, right? So there's a lot of anecdotal stories. Dong Ho Chang again from Seattle. Traffic signal at University Way, 40th, changed to always stop in 2014. 2 collisions 1 year before. No collisions 20 months, 1 month after. My old story, which I wanted to tell today, but I didn't have time, so I'll tell it now, was in Butte, Montana, which was a 8-signal town, and they were very proud of their 8 signals, right? So it meant they weren't a one-horse town. It's where Evel Knievel is from. That's how they drive. So, in fact, the mayor was married to Evel Knievel's daughter, and he hired me, and we did a striping plan for their streets. I was informed, I had nothing to do with this. They had 8 signals, but one of them, where there were constantly crashes, got taken out by a car and destroyed the signal. And there were crashes at this intersection like every few months. So they said, oh, we got to raise the signal. We don't want to be a 7-signal town. We got to raise the money and bring that signal back. But it took them like a year to raise the money. And over the end of the year, there'd been they put up a temporary stop sign with sandbags. At the end of the year, there'd been no crashes. And they're like, oh, I guess the signal was bad. So they didn't bring it back. Lakeland, Florida. I just collect these articles when I see them on Twitter. They're going to convert 5 more intersections to 4-way stops downtown because crashes are down. This is somewhere in Oregon. I forget where I was, maybe Eugene. But I stopped in this intersection. I'm like, this is the good city. This is what you want. The cyclist is going the wrong way. The wheelchair user is comfortable in the intersection. And by the way, I always want to mention, I talk about the walkable city. Clearly, anything you do to make a city more walkable makes it more rollable. That's true. That's the truth. Also, anything you do to make it more rollable, it's the whole stroller theory, right? Anything you do to make it more rollable makes it more walkable. So this is very much about wheelchair users as well. This is an ideal kind of intersection. So when we work in cities like downtown Albuquerque, we look for the opportunities. The lighter travel is the green, blue, and yellow. So whenever a lighter travel street was intersecting another lighter travel street, we said, let's put in an all-way stop. And we recommended, in our walkability study for Albuquerque, we recommended 17 of them. They took us up on only 11 of them. And this is the ultimate outcome. The stop signs were reinstalled. But first they were not. First they were uninstalled, or they were bagged, because there was a rebellion. Because people hate change of all kinds. Good change, bad change, people hate change. And what happened was people were upset, so the city bagged the stop signs and restarted the signals. And then there was a bigger counter-revolution where more people were more upset. And the people who were upset were the drivers, because they realized, oh my gosh, it takes us longer to get through downtown with the signals than with the stop signs. And so that's why this says, city reinstalls downtown stop signs to reduce not just speeding, but traffic pileup. And that's kind of a counterintuitive thing. But if you stop briefly at every intersection, you're still getting through the downtown faster than if you sit and wait for the light. And when Gus and I were coming into downtown yesterday, we spent a lot of time sitting on the whole trip in east of downtown as well. The whole trip in, we spent a lot of time sitting at lights that no one was driving in front of us, just wasted asphalt, right? So that's a benefit as well. I found this article today that apparently the 2-way reversion we did in Albuquerque has had a nice impact on their downtown revival as well. Now, we know this from the MUTCD, the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, that typically 2 intersecting streets with less than 8,000 cars per day on each street do not warrant a signal. So again, you look at the numbers, wrong image. You look at the numbers in the downtown core that I showed you, and you see, and again, we need updated images, we need post-COVID numbers. You see where an 8,000 meets an 8,000 or less, and that's a signal that can go away. But let me remember to tell you, as I'll repeat later, you have to think systematically. You have to think of it as a network, understanding that you can't just think of each street individually. And of course, when it's a porous, small block grid, and every street is relatively thin, and people can take whatever street they want, you have to do a traffic study that looks at the whole system. And you don't have to just look at one street alone in terms of its own traffic. This is Mobile, Alabama, where we had made a plan with Nelson Nygaard and my friend Allison Fletcher, and we reverted 11 streets from 1-way back to 2-way. and we removed the big red circles. We removed 21 signals. This is now implemented. It was just implemented. This is Scranton, which was just passed and fully funded to happen over the next year, where you could not drive around the courthouse square. You got flung off in every direction because of the way the one-ways were going. So the green are streets that have been converted to two-way travel from one-way, and all these dots are stop signs that are signals that are being removed and replaced by stop signs in downtown Scranton. But there are times when going to the two-way travel, the number of trips on certain streets, even when you look systematically, there are places where you're going to need signals and you're going to need left-hand turn lanes. And the issue there is what goes away? What do you lose? It's a difficult balancing act because parallel parking is really important. Parallel parking is an essential barrier of steel that protects the sidewalk from moving vehicles, and you don't want to lose it if you don't have to. This is Fort Lauderdale, where our walkability study said, hey, why is it 2 lanes out of town at rush hour? You're not allowed to park on this side of the street. Well, we knew why, because they wanted people to not linger and enjoy the bars and restaurants. So they made it very easy to get out of town at rush hour on Himmershey Boulevard. But our plan put this parking back, and we convinced them because we showed them, this is happy hour on the parked side of the street, and this was happy hour on the unparked side of the street. And this restaurant was perennially going out of business because no one wanted to be 5 feet from a car going 30, 35 miles an hour. People don't want to dine that way. They don't want to walk that way. They don't want to stand that way. Now, I've seen plans and heard plans for Congress and other streets where you're planning to eliminate parallel parking and angle parking. I think that's a bad idea. So my talk tonight isn't about that. We do not base our practice on theory. We base it on evidence. We base it on examples. I'm very hard pressed to name a single successful commercial street that does not have at least one side of parallel parking. And I challenge anyone in this room or in the Public Works Department to find those examples, because, a lot of streets exist in America, and I can't think of one successful shopping street without parallel parking unless it's pedestrian only. So be very careful about removing parallel parking or angle parking from your streets. Now, you have this strong downtown transportation plan, the ACT plan. It sets this goal of a 50-50 mode share. This is what I was able to find online. You are well on your way to that goal, and you are a very weird city. Because the idea that less than 2/3 or roughly 2/3 of your commuters are solo drivers, that puts you in a very sweet spot. Very few American cities have that. So that tells me that transit is super important here. It tells me that biking and walking are super important here. They say you can't get the cowboy off of his horse. I hear that whenever I'm in Texas. But you've gotten a lot of cowboys off their horses. So that's great. You've made amazing gains in terms of new bus facilities, new separated bike lanes. We spotted a bunch of bikers, cyclists, as we were walking around. We even found cycling dogs on the shoulders of this gentleman. There we go. And of course, transit and other forms of mobility. So it's important that whatever we recommend, but we're not here to make recommendations, whatever you guys recommend, whatever you act upon is, as the ACT plan does, is focused very much on efficient movement of buses, as in this current bus plan and any new transit that you might have coming. And they're a little hard to read, but this is the bike plan that's in the ACT plan. And moving cyclists effectively and efficiently and moving buses is important. So these are caveats that might impact this wish for a uniform, universal, 2-lane, 2-way solution. You've already reverted a whole bunch of streets and street segments from 1-way to 2-way, which is great. These are the additional street segments that are in the plan to be reverted. And it's great. I do feel you could go a lot further. So if you look at the current condition, this is where you have, roughly, you have red is one-way streets, blue is two-way streets, a few weird little segments. Sometimes the state does this to you, right? Where you have weird interruptions. This is the proposal, where everything in green is in the ACT plan with the goal of it being reverted. But that plan has not been officially adopted. It has not been official, well, maybe it's been adopted, but it hasn't been funded. It's not being implemented. I'm sorry, I don't know all the details, but I know that the folks I talked to said, there's no guarantee or expectation this will happen. There's a hope it will happen. So at the very least, you want to see this much happening. And that said, then now I'll criticize it. So here's the final outcome. You can see there's still, if all that happens, there's still a lot of one-ways. There's weird segments that are one-way, interrupting the two-way, and a lot of streets which potentially could or should be two-way are still one-way. But the question is, can they hold the left turn lanes when we have a lot of traffic? Can they hold the buses where we want buses to be? Can they hold cyclists adequately? Now and then here's my proposal, which ends up looking like this. Just so there's no uncertainty about what I think is ideal. I think the car counts will allow it once we get better car counts, but there will have to be occasional left-hand turn lanes. There'll have to be occasional bus lanes in addition, etc. I mentioned earlier, it's a network. The reason the next step I recommend in putting forth this map is actually a traffic study that thinks of it in a network way and actually just models it. It says, what if, we got to start with the ideal condition. What if every one of these streets was two-lane, two-way with a stop sign at the intersection? Like, what would that do? How would it work with the current car counts? And probably there'll be some failures that will adjust it, and the desire for buses and bikes will adjust it. But I do think it's possible to have buses and bikes in this system still, even with dedicated lanes, all two-way travel. You have 44 feet from curb to curb on most of your streets. Some of them are wider, some of them are a little different, but it's very easy to work here because all your streets are just about 44 feet from curb to curb. If you accept a 7-foot parking lane, which used to be the standard, then you can actually fit 2 parking lanes, 2 driving lanes, 10 feet being the NACTO standard. You probably have an 11-foot standard now, which is from AASHTO. AASHTO has an H in it for highway. NACTO is the National Association of City Transportation Officials. They put forward a 10-foot standard. So you can fit 2 parking lanes, 2 driving lanes, and, hold your ears, bicycle advocates, a slightly substandard cycle track. Now, one of the most popular, it's in 10 feet. One of the most popular cycle tracks, and one of the first in Washington, D.C., is on 15th Street. Everyone uses it. It's 2 3.5-foot wide bike lanes with a 3-foot buffer. It's great. When you have two ways of travel and actually 7-foot clear plus the buffer, it's fine. What I'm recommending here is a 2-foot buffer against the car doors and 2 4-foot travel lanes, just so you can have both. Now, you might decide you only want 1 bike lane, you want to alter them street by street, have a one-way system for bikes, that's okay, right? But I'm calling this the Austin Classic. Now, the only problem with this street that I believe is that it does not meet the Uniform Fire Code 26-foot clear, which is the worst rule in America. Now, it's not a rule, it's not a law, it's a recommendation by the Universal Fire people that cities either choose to implement or not. You have a bunch of streets in downtown that do not have 26-foot clear, and they have tall buildings on them. So the question is, why is it not being enforced? And you should know that probably the majority of the cities in America do not enforce it. A lot of cities do, Dallas certainly does. 26 feet is killer because it does not allow you the classic American Main Street. This is the classic American Main Street. Park, drive, drive, park. And if you have to add another 3 feet to each of these lanes, it's not a very slow street. So what do we do about that? What if we have to implement the 26-foot clear? We have to get rid of one of the parking lanes, which I don't recommend, But then you can have an 8-foot parking lane, 2 10-foot driving lanes, a 4-foot buffer, and 2 6-foot bike lanes. So you've lost half the parking. And then this sidewalk edge is protected by the presence of the bike lane. The buffer wants to have little armadillos or something in it, but the fire truck can mount it, right? So you meet the 26-foot clear. So we're calling this the Austin Compromise. Sounds like something from the history books. Then what if a street just needs to have a ton of traffic on it? And it's not going to be a street that we're going to use to satisfy our bike circulation or to satisfy our bus circulation, although buses can go perfectly well on this, but not in a dedicated lane. I'm calling that the Austin Driver. And with 7-foot parking lanes, you fit 3 lanes of traffic, which includes that left turn lane that allows a lot more access, a lot more throughput at signalized intersections. So maybe a few streets need to be signalized. That's where we would kick into the Austin Driver. And then there's the Austin Rider. Now, I theoretically hate bus bike lanes, but in practicality, they work really well. So it's something to think about. Who's biked on a bus bike lane? Did you like it? Because the bus is almost never there. And when the bus is there, you know at least the driver's not going to kill you, probably like a typical motorist. So this street has a 7-foot parking lane, 3 10-foot lanes, another 7-foot parking lane, and the bike can go in the bus lane. Now, buses like to have 11-foot lanes. These could be 9.5 feet. We see a lot of 9.5-foot driving lanes. In Boston, the MBTA accepts 10.5-foot lanes. In Des Moines, the DART, whatever it's called in Des Moines, asks for 10-foot lanes. And we said, why are you the one transit agency in America that wants 10-foot lanes? And they say, well, all of our customers are pedestrians, and we want them to survive on their way to the bus, which I thought was wonderful. So, but I do like the Austin Classic as what you try to start with, right? And then go from there. Again, not every street needs to have a bike facility in it. Bicyclists just need to get safely to every address. That doesn't mean a bike lane in every street. Sorry if you disagree with me. These are some examples of the sort of street designs that would allow you to maintain that two-way travel on most of the streets, but still provide for the excess travel demand, traffic demand, the bus demand, and the bike demand. So I think there's a plan that could be made and could be supported and could be approved that is pretty much two-way travel everywhere, but still handles those other goals that you're trying to achieve. So that's what I feel is a good starting point. And that's the end of my talk. But don't clap yet. All right, clap. I always like to end with resources to share. I mentioned Angie Schmidt's book, Right of Way, about the pedestrian epidemic. I do hope you'll buy and read my book, and I would delight in signing it for you. If you are in the business, if you are a planner or an engineer or an activist who really needs to know the details, how wide certain lanes should be and other things, then this book is for you. Are we selling this book? Oh, wonderful. Walkable City Rules. 2 great books by engineers who have seen the light. Chuck Marone of Strong Towns fame has this book called Confessions of a Recovering Engineer that I highly recommend. And then more recently, Killed by a Traffic Engineer by Wes Marshall, which is even a thicker and more detailed discussion. And then, of course, you all need to read Megan Kimball's book, City Limits. I do have a couple TED Talks. This is the one that you can ask your friends to watch if they only have 15 minutes. It's called 4 Ways to Make a City More Walkable. And there's a documentary about the work we do that you can watch for free called Walkable USA. So I recommend that. All of these resources are available at our website. We are Speck Dempsey, like the boxer Dempsey. And thank you. Now you can clap for real. Thank you. Now, Adam made this slide. I don't like his font as much as mine. But here is, again, I think this is our last slide, right? We want you to, yeah, whoops. Now, you can still get this, right, on your phone. Join the movement. And now we're going to do Q&A. Wonderful.
All right, you want to join me?
Between two ferns, but the fern's between us. So.
That's right. I don't remember that rap song about like I've got a boat or something.
Yeah, I'm on a boat.
I'm on a boat. Yeah, I feel
I'm
like
on a
this
boat.
is like the Urbanist version. I'm on a stage with Jeff. What else do I need here? Okay, well, thank you so much to Andy for collecting the audience questions. And there's some really interesting ones, so let's just get straight into it. So,
By the way, this is the hard part because I was able to make my talk the way I wanted it, but now I have no idea what you're going to ask me. So.
Okay, all right. Well, let's give you a fun one first. Maybe they're all fun. What is the most egregious urban planning decision you've ever witnessed? You came up with that one. That was a fun one.
Only playing to this issue. A few cities are so far behind the curve that they are implementing one-way streets right now. Las Vegas just decided to turn a major street from two-way to one-way. I'll answer. Don't get me started about Neom, which is we won't talk about the Saudi Newtown. I'm not a fan of, I do think that the Hyperloop or the other, the Boring Company tunnels are just a really expensive way to add lanes that are no more efficient than any other lanes to cities' traffic networks.
What is your understanding about the original rationale for implementing one-way streets, particularly in downtown areas?
So these people were well-meaning, right? We need to remember that. These people, what they wanted downtown to succeed. As more people moved out of the city and as the suburban home became the standard way of living, the planners, including Robert Moses, who did it most famously, believed that the city would be most vital if it was easy to get in and out of. So the combined effort of running interstates through cities, so you could land in them very easily, and of making these one-way networks which do speed traffic, was intended to help the city thrive. The absence of opposing traffic when you want to make a left turn does create a more voluminous flow in a one-way system than in a two-way system. I should say, though, I don't think that anyone ever did the math about the additional, and they've done it more recently, about the additional travel time and travel distance that comes from having to loop around. And if you do that, the advantages somewhat disappear.
Okay. All right, we've got an Austin-specific question here. What is a design element you've seen on a City of Austin street where you thought they had the right idea, but it would be better if it were like this?
Oh. Wow.
Anyone claim that one?
Is it 6th Street that has the barriers on it?
Uh-huh. The colored barriers.
Yeah. I think, yeah, I don't know the dynamics of the bar spill out. That's a problem on that street, and that's a problem that stretches beyond urban planning and street design. But the people are correct that cars provide supervision. And when a street doesn't have cars on it and it's 2 a.m. after the bars let out, it's actually probably safer to have cars on the street, but you want cars moving slowly, and you want probably a stronger visual connection between the cars and the businesses. So I would think the right solution is not these big Jersey barriers and one-way travel, but slower two-way travel on that street.
Okay, all right. Have we got any Barcelona fans in the house? Yeah, I love Barcelona. Okay, cities like Barcelona have a network of one-direction streets that are signalized and intersect in ways that prevent right turns across bike lanes. How do you do two directions, but stop right turn across bike lanes if you can't prohibit right on red?
Well, first of all, you should prohibit right on red. That's you don't have to clap, but that is an applause line. Right on red. Right on red is clearly adding convenience at the safety expense and life and death expense of pedestrians. Barcelona's a good model. Portland's a good model of one-way systems that are small blocks and that are very safe, principally because they're mostly one lane one-ways. And I neglected to say, it was implied, that one lane one-ways are not dangerous at all, because it's that extra width and the opportunity to jockey that makes the multi-lane dangerous. The the idea that the Vision Zero idea that it's the potential for conflict that creates safety suggests, strangely and counterintuitively, that the more opportunities there are to hit something or somebody, the safer people drive. And the safest streets of all are what you call Wunnerfs. Who knows what a Wunnerf is, right? Where you have children playing in the street and people driving down, but it's such a completely slow speed environment with everything mixed that people are very careful. I don't know if Wunnerfs would work with American SUVs where actually you can't see for the first 20 feet in front of the car. Have you seen those studies where they show you have to line up 12 children in front of an SUV for the driver to see the 13th child? And front over crashes, what they're called front over crashes, have gone up from like 6 a year to 400 a year in the US, entirely due to that factor. But ignoring that, the idea that there's a lot of different intersecting motions when you have all these different directions of travel and different road users is something that experience suggests causes drivers to be much more careful.
All right, well, this is our final question, and then a few words of my own, but this is a nice one. So the question is, how do you stay motivated when urban planning moves so slowly? And I guess I would just add on to that, how do you feel about the future?
Is this how does one stay motivated, or is this how I stay motivated?
It said, why are you?
Me, it might mean everybody. So we used to who's read Suburban Nation? So people who have more gray hair come up to me at planning conferences and say, Suburban Nation is the reason I became a planner, and thank you. And I say, well, you shouldn't be well, first, I'm sorry. Secondly, you shouldn't be thanking me, because I had the exact same experience hearing Andres Dwani and Elizabeth Plater-Zyberk give their talks that became Suburban Nation is the reason I became a planner. And it was such an important message for me to hear back in the 1990s. But when we wrote Suburban Nation, we thought that we could stop sprawl. Like, we really, at least I did, like, I wasn't fully aware of all the perverse incentives and all the subsidization and all the powers that be that make sprawl continue to happen. But that was our goal, and so it was easy to become disheartened based on the fact that sprawl has continued apace the entire time since then, right? The amount of sprawl we had when we were looking in 2000 at how much horrible sprawl there was is like half as much sprawl as we have now. And in cities like Austin, that's certainly the case, right? Austin has sprawled tremendously. We've redefined the mission. The mission now, I say I've redefined the mission for me, which is just to give more people the opportunity to live safely and affordably in walkable places. It's a different mission. That sprawl is going to keep happening. The incentives are still there. The AVs are going to make it even easier to live further from work and cheaper to commute further distances. And there's no reason to hope that sprawl will stop. But by making changes like we are making in other places, and you are making in Austin, and you can make more of in Austin, to enable this walkable lifestyle for more people is a very noble goal, and it's enough of a goal. Adding affordability to that mix is the biggest challenge. I was telling the city staff and city councilors this morning, and this is not a facetious, a rhetorical statement. The only thing that worries me about these changes is that downtown's going to be so great that it'll become completely unaffordable, right? And that's a real issue. There needs to be not a concern about gentrification, but a concern about displacement when you make these changes. And it did take me several decades as a planner to realize that it was my job to gentrify. And that's a quote you don't want to hear unless you hear the follow-up, which is that it's my job to make places better. And when you make places better, they become more loved. And when they become more loved, they become more expensive. And there's a real risk that people will be displaced. And so when we work in cities, we're very careful to name these techniques that cities can use and do use in terms of mortgage abatement programs and turning renter into owner programs and other and land trusts, right? And other techniques that cities effectively use to limit displacement, because when you make places better, they do become less affordable. That wasn't your question, but what gives me hope is the little changes that we've made to a lot of cities.
Well, those were the questions we had. Any final thoughts, Jeff? It's been wonderful to have Jeff Speck here in Austin.
Well, I mean, we thank you. No final thoughts. Yeah. No final thoughts. But I mean, what are your next steps? And your next steps, I think, are convincing your city councilors and city staff that you can take a more aggressive approach here and at least study it. At least lay out the issue is there's been a lot of horse trading and tons of work and well-meaning, well-intended collective work by your city staff and by your city councilors and by citizens to land on the outcome that's in your ACT plan, right? It was only over 2 or 3 years, but there's been a lot of horse trading and a lot of decisions that were made, and I don't want to just traipse in here and nullify those by saying there's a better solution. There's a better solution. And so we have to acknowledge the work already done, and we have to encourage our leaders and the wonderful people working at the city who've done so many great things already to maybe aim a little bit higher and try to model an ideal all two-way condition and then find the problems with it, right? As opposed to what I think they did, which was to find all the streets that they could potentially convert. But I would take it from the other direction and say, what if we converted all the streets? What goes wrong? And how can we fix that? And then maybe we'll end up converting more streets back to two-way.
Thanks so much,
Okay.
Jeff.
Thank you.
Well, that was incredible. Jeff's visit here is an important part of the campaign that a coalition of organizations, including Safe Streets Austin and CNU Central Texas, are working on to really have serious consideration of converting as many, if not all, of downtown Austin's one-way streets to two-way. So we need your support with that. We are not, all because Jeff came to town and said some great stuff, we are not there yet. We have not won this battle by any means. And we're going to need your support and your help. So you're going to be getting some emails from us about how you can help with this conversation, because this is a big deal. Downtown Vancouver, Washington, their conversion was a 10 to 20% increase in retail sales. So there's just so many, Jeff went into it, success stories, and we need to really give this a good shot here. So that's it. So one thing, we wanted to do a group photo with that slide, the penultimate slide. So those who support this, please come up. Where's that photo? You're there. Okay, can you kind of position yourself ready? Come up, and then Jeff's going to be signing books in the lobby. And that's it. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Well, I'm glad I went to that. Jeff is really amazing. He spent a lot of time studying cities, writing about cities, and making a difference. And if we do it in Austin, he could make a difference for all of us. So until the next time, this is Preston Tyre, your host, with the Tower Coffee Hour, signing off.